decided on. And oh, perfect. And it's just kind of interesting to me to kind of think, especially with the 200th, so much has been focused on the territorial period and just how quite different the town was back then. Of course, much, much smaller, but also just the everyday life of Tallahasseans was much different in general. And so for some reason, I'm like really struck by livery stables, like valet horses is just like such an interesting concept to me. And so that was something that I wanted to talk about. And then Thomas Brown, Governor Brown, and his involvement in hotels was kind of strange to me too. How do you have a hotel owning governor later on? How does that happen? Usually it's law or being a planter or something like that. Can you guys hear me?
I would be a little bit louder, a little louder with this crowd.
So Thomas Brown and his involvement and him becoming a governor was kind of interesting to me, especially since he owned a hotel in the beginning and operated that. Usually people enter politics through like law or something or being a planter. So that was kind of, I just had a little more questions about him and it kind of grew from there. So we'll start. There we go.
Should just use these two.
Oh, yeah. That one. Okay. So we'll start looking at the original owners of lots, the old plan of the city of Tallahassee. So we're really focused on a really small segment of town tonight. Really kind of, we're looking over here, we're looking here, a little bit over here. So this really constitutes the core of the historic area of town. And so just keep this in mind to orient yourself as we're talking. So we'll start with Thomas Brown. So he was born in Westmoreland County, Virginia. He migrated to Tallahassee in 1828 to settle, but had come the winter before, 1826, 1827, with a bunch of enslaved people to start building cabins and places where his plantation would be. And then later he brought his family in 1828. What also struck me was just the sheer number of enslaved people that he came to Tallahassee with. It was quite shocking for me to hear, actually. And then he is associated with Planter's Hotel by 1830. That's the first hotel that we have him associated with. And then by 1833, he's operating Brown's Hotel or Brown's Inn. And so I kind of had a couple questions. At first, I was like, well, okay, before the hotel existed, where were they living? And so the family moved into Tallahassee and lived in a house just down the hill from Governor Duval in the Houston Myers Park area today. And then I was like, well, if you're running a hotel, it kind of makes sense to live in the hotel. So the family moves out to Lake Jackson to live on their plantation for a little bit. But then between 1829 and 1830, the governor has some financial difficulty where he was really wanting to grow sugarcane and had a bad season, a cold snap kind of killed it. And then he had some fraudulent friends up in Virginia who got him on the hook for $50,000. And so he had to pay that. And so to do that, he had to sell off part of his land and part of the people that he enslaved. So they were separated as well. And then his family moves into town, and that's when he starts working at Planter's Hotel. And then I was like, why did he make the pivot to running a hotel? Like, why was that? Was it something that he wanted to do? Was it something that he thought he would be good at? And we get an answer from his daughter writing her memoirs much later in her life when she was in her 70s. She says, he cannot have chosen anything to do that was as unwise as keeping a hotel. He knew nothing about it, nor did my mother. Though Lizzie thought he didn't know too much in the beginning, he obviously was a quick study because Brown's as an institution lasted quite a long time until the 1880s, 1886 when it burns down. Let's see. Okay, so on the right, you guys can't really see it. I wish I had made it bigger or something. But we have an ad, two ads back to back. The top one is from the Planter's Hotel announcing that Brown is leaving and that J.W. Reeves is now the person who will be operating the hotel. And then the bottom one is Brown's announcement stating that he's on the west side of the Capitol Square between St. Augustine and Pensacola streets, ready to accept his adoring public and the travelers who were coming through. And so this one was published November 2nd, 1833. And then moving kind of through the early history of Brown's, we have some ads showing that it wasn't just a place for travelers, but it was also a place for traveling medical professionals. They would set up their shop temporarily, or their practice rather, temporarily, and see patients. Like the two on the right are from R.H. Harrison, who was a surgeon dentist, and then Dr. Comfort, which is a great name for a dentist. Dr. Comfort. I don't think that was his real name, probably wasn't, but Dr. Comfort offered his services in 1834. Let's see. He offered porcelain teeth. He'll wait on ladies at their residence, so you didn't necessarily have to come to Brown's. And then something kind of interesting too, on the left, that ad is for the Alligator line, which was a stagecoach line that connected Augusta with Mobile with stops along the way. And so there was kind of like a little spur track that connected Tallahassee and Chattahoochee. And so it started off like a lot of stagecoach lines do as a mail running system, and then expanded to have passengers as well. And so the local office was at Brown's Hotel in Tallahassee. And the local agent was L. Wilson. And so this one is from 1839. So early in the history, the hotel is kind of serving a variety of purposes. And in 1839, that's when Brown separates from the hotel. I believe he still owns it. He leases it at first, though sometimes it's a little confusing. The newspaper articles say that he sold the hotel or somebody is leasing it from him, kind of in a contradicting manner. There we go. And so that's something that I kind of want to dig deeper into as I continue to look at Brown and the Brown's Hotel. And so Brown, when he was in Virginia, he had served as in the post office. And so when he came to Tallahassee also, he was in the land receiving. He was one of the people drawing the maps and noting who was getting the land kind of in the first dispersals. And so in 1839, he joins the, not congressional, excuse me, the thing that you make when you're making a new document for it starts with a C, Constitution. He joined the Constitutional Committee in 1839. And really, I think there he sees that his political star can take off and he really can't be running the hotel day to day. And so he decides to lease it. And so between the next year, so 1840 to 1841, it's known as the Adelphi. And so this hotel changes names quite frequently, and this is the first of many. And so the Adelphi was run by Joseph Crosky and David Wilson, and they note that they are making improvements and repairs to the building and will have by the ensuing fall an extensive brick building erected on the property, whereby they will be able to accommodate strangers visiting this county in a satisfactory manner. And then on the right, I found a listing of charges and rates, which was kind of interesting. So you could get board and lodging by the day for $2.50, dinner for $1, supper for 50 cents, breakfast for 75, and then plain old lodging for 50. Oh, I forgot to mention to you. So one of the things that had me curious about kind of hotels in Tallahassee came from Akil Murat's recollection of staying in a hotel, and he described it as a room with beds for 30 people, and you lay down next to the person, you didn't care who it was, just like you don't care who you're sitting next to in an opera theater. And I was like, that is shocking. And so I really wanted to find more descriptions of one, the hotel that he was describing, which I think may have been the planners, and really kind of how the rooms were set up and how it becomes more and more privatized, because that will work for kind of like your traveling gentlemen, but that would not work for ladies. So the differences in the genders and how they were put up are more questions that I kind of have along the way. Something also kind of interesting about this ad is about partway through in the middle section, it says, children and colored servants were half price and white servants were full price. So that makes me think there was some change in accommodations between Black and non-Black servants. And just things like that are kind of interesting to note and ask more questions about. So, we know in 1843, the Great Fire sweeps through Tallahassee, around the area where that we'll be talking about actually tonight. And post-fire, Brown's was a place now called the City Hotel that people would set up temporary shops, kind of like they were doing as they were allowed to do in the city parks. But here, L.M. Baker, with the remnant of the stock of his dry goods and groceries, may be found at the City Hotel buildings in the room formerly occupied as the bar. So here, probably this is not happening just out of the kindness of Brown's heart, but it's also serving another civic duty where he's helping, well, not Brown, because he's not involved in the hotel here, but the hotel as an institution is kind of helping community members and future, or not future, but alike entrepreneurs move forward after the fire. So yeah, that's a good segue into kind of the city hotel timeline. So in the early 1840s and 1850s, sometimes you'll see city and brown still used pretty interchangeably. So here we have evidence that Thomas Brown is still owning the hotel, because the ad on the left is from Brown's point of view, telling you that William Hemingway is now leasing the hotel, and he is a hotel runner from New York, so you know he knows what he's doing. And he's believing that he will keep an excellent house and spare no exertion or expense to make his guests comfortable. So it's still an institution in town that's functioning, and people are still staying in the hotel, and Brown is just making, I guess, it known that he's still connected with the hotel and that he gives this guy his blessing. And then by 1866, J.L. McGuffin is running the hotel. So you see it's kind of a revolving door of different people operating the hotel at different times. Here he's touting that he has a fine bar room attached to the hotel where the best liquors can be found. The motto of this hotel is, as it has always been, we strive to please, which is a great motto for a hotel. Okay, so this is one of my favorites. So these two views, the front and from the back of the hotel, come from the poet Sidney Lanier's Florida, Its Scenery, Climate, and History, published in 1875. And so Sidney Lanier came and he stayed at the hotel and he left a recollection of it, which is pretty cool, and I'll read that to you now. We found ourselves drawn up in front of a genuine old-fashioned tavern, with a long double piazza running along its entire front, with many nooks and corners here and there, and with a general suggestion of old-timey ease and honest comfort arising indefinably out of its aspect. These suggestions took, as we entered, the more substantial shapes of well-furnished apartments, not giant, ample rooms, whose dimensions showed a southern amplitude, and of a neat-colored auntie who took charge of our bags and ushered us in our quarters with a quiet respect that formed the very perfection of unobtrusive courtesy. In which quarter, however, we did not long stay, for in ascending the long flight of stairs at the rear of the house, we observed that a double-story piazza also ran around this length of it, L's and all, and that an indistinct view of the ground sloping rapidly down the back of the building and of a wide, much-notched horizon had revealed itself as we passed. Toward every side, the hills swelled up, colored with the colors that suggested fertility and abundance. Through rounded brows, their slopes and valleys between them were full of green crops, comfortable homesteads, and farm buildings which reposed in the distances, each cluster of which had its own protecting grove of oaks standing about it in the benignant attitudes of outer layers and pennants. It was a sort of prospect that the grave old English writers would have called goodly and pleasant. So we have this beautiful, lush description of the countryside that you can see behind the hotel. And I love looking at images like this because you can really appreciate the topography of Tallahassee that gets kind of lost within the current landscape. Let's see. So yeah, a snapshot from the City Hotel period, 1875. And then kind of winding down towards the end of the City Hotel period, we have a photograph from about the 1870s showing that, okay, keep this in your brain here. And the picture here is a pretty good representation. And now a local merchant, William Slessor, is now the proprietor. And so on the right, we're seeing that William Slessor is now the runner or the operator of the hotel. He has a first-class shaving room and hairdresser that's also partnering with him. And something kind of interesting about Slessor is that he has these series of ledgers that are in the state archives showing the people that checked into the hotel. And he also has his tax records and his daily, he has the ledgers which show what people are charging, and then he has the register book, excuse me. And so for 1875, he only paid $60 for the hotel lot, the land itself, and then $40 for the furniture within it. And then you get to kind of see a snapshot of the things that he's ordering just to keep the hotel running. So he's paying for eggs, flour, hominy, coffee, cooking oil, sugar, and ginger ale, mostly. And then people were staying in the City Hotel from all over, coming from Georgia, South Carolina, Kentucky, New York, Boston. I should probably look at my notes and see if there's something I wanted to tell you guys now that we're 17 slides in. No. Okay, perfect. And here's a picture. You guys can't really see it in the back, but here's a picture of the ledger. This one is kind of cool. So this is from January 4th, 1875. And E.B. Brown's dramatic company was putting on a show at Galley Hall. And so these are the actors and actresses who were staying at the hotel. And so here they advertise at Galley Hall, commencing Monday, January 4th. Charge, I don't know what that is, of program Mighty. Kind of cool. And then this one I really liked because it showed that people are kind of always the same. Sometimes they are randomly dramatic or goofy. And so the writing of Miss J. Moss, I don't know. Well, down here you have her name spelled the normal way, but like, I don't know if it's supposed to be like spooky or whatever. But I don't know, it caught my eye. It made me laugh when I was looking at the book. And so now we get to the last kind of iteration of the building as it is, the Morgan. So this one we have a really lovely picture of between 1885 and 1886. It's called the Morgan because now Mr. Morgan and Carr are the new lessees of the hotel, and they are taking charge and pushing ahead with improvements preparatory for the rush of visitors in the fall. So Tallahassee, specifically because of the legislative cycle, the fall was the busy season for the hotels. And so you'll see in a lot of these ads, they reference if there has been a change in management, that they're really getting ready for the next fall push. And so we talked a little bit about before about how Brown kind of links the two hotels. He opens and operates the city, but was associated with the planter. And so now Marie is going to talk about some of the artifacts that we found at the Planter's Hotel.
Oh, she's not done yet. She'll be done. Okay, let's see if I can do this right. Oh, going backwards. Okay. So, Lonnie, this is for you. Lonnie wanted Jim Dunbar to come back and talk about the Planter's Hotel. So just a little bit more background on the Planter's Hotel. Kimberlyn touched on a little bit, but it is by far the most successful hotel in Tallahassee prior to 1834. It was widely known, and there were very opulent events that happened there. They had a theater that was built in there eventually, and anybody who's anybody, including Prince Murat, knew that you did it, whatever it was, at the Planter's Hotel. So in October of 1966, so we're talking legacy artifact collections here, we're going way back into the past. Former state archaeologist Ross Morrell is joined by archaeologist Dan Penton, who's still in the Tallahassee area, and Sonny Cockrell to conduct salvage archaeology. And when I talk about the archaeology aspects of what Kimberlyn is talking about, we're talking truly salvage archaeology here. So I wanted to show you an aerial view through time of the area we're talking about. So you can see in this 1949, the Capitol here in the, right here. This is the Capitol building to get you all oriented. This is Monroe Street, okay? In 1970, notice how all these buildings are gone and now there's a parking lot, okay? And then this is today. This is the House chambers. And this is the area that they were constructing when they came across what I'm about to show you. And Chip Birdsong was kind enough to make these maps for me to give you a little more orientation about where we're talking about. Okay, so in the early mid-2000s, Jim Dunbar is fascinated by the artifacts that they found during these excavations. They excavated 13 features in that dirt parking lot that I showed you in the last scene, in the last slide. But his research, because he was interested in one artifact I'm going to show you in a minute, focused on Privy 3 and features 5 and 6, which I've highlighted on the map there. And Ross Morrell believed that these features, 3 features, I should have said, I said 2, were associated with the Planter's Hotel. And Kimberlyn mentioned the Washington Hall fire of 1843 came in and wiped out most of downtown Tallahassee. The Planter's Hotel was spared. but not the outbuildings, not the associated outbuildings with the hotel itself. So yeah, so these, and I'm showing you here, that is Hutchinson's map with the red arrow showing the Planters Hotel. Chamber pots. That's what Jim Dunbar was so fascinated with. And Lee, maybe you remember this as well. But there are a lot of chamber pots that they found during these excavations. They never published a report, unfortunately. So the only information that we have is what Dunbar got by talking to Ross Morell and talking to Dan Penton. And actually, I talked a little bit with each of them as well. So it's really the only information we have. I was telling Guy earlier that there's a field notebook that Ross made that's basically a rectangle with some squiggly lines in it. There's not a lot there, but and they literally were doing salvage archaeology, so I guess that's to be expected. But there were 36 pearlware chamber pots recovered. So these are the more complete ones, and some of them are smaller. And the painted ones are a little bit earlier. They kind of fascinated Jim. That's, you know, not typically that elaborate. And who wouldn't want one with a lid on it, right? And you got this thing in your room. So, but I mean, you can see that you would have this many chamber pots if you were running a hotel, right? At this time when you don't have indoor plumbing. And I just threw this in, Kimberlyn found this really cool ad for this sarsaparilla bottle, medicine bottle. This is actually on exhibit at the Union Bank right now, and that's just an ad for it. And this bottle dates to around the same time period. And since we had that, I wanted to show you some of the other bottles that were also recovered from what they believe to be the Planters Hotel. So we have a stout bottle, a snuff bottle, and a couple other kind of nondescript bottles. And notice that the one on the far right has been burned, right? So what's happened is this fire comes through and burns these outbuildings that they're using as storage. And it creates this layer of ash over the top, which creates an anaerobic environment for everything underneath it. And when they go to excavate this stuff, everything is stacked very neatly. And the newspapers are still there and they're all wet. And I wondered when I was researching this, what happened to the newspapers? And they just deteriorated because they were wet. And unfortunately, we don't have those. That would be really cool if we did. So these are some more objects from there. A food storage jar, a carved bone domino. That's a utensil handle made out of antler. And that is a tumbler that has a ponel scar on the bottom of it. So we know these things, some of these things we can date fairly well, right? A wash basin, you would expect to see that as part of the toilet set, along with your chamber pot, typical hotel things. Tobacco pipes, presumably in the bar. What's really interesting about the one on the far left is it is burned, and it's burned in such intense heat that it has curved it. And you can see the black on it, but these are just different examples of the types of tobacco pipes that are there. So what's really fascinating about this and what really pinpoints it and makes Ross think this is the Planters Hotel is English Staffordshire pottery, okay? So the English are making huge amounts of this pottery. They're just renowned throughout the world for their pottery. They're mimicking Chinese porcelain, but making it affordable for everyday people. And they're sending huge amounts of it through actually St. Mark's and bringing it up by mule train up to Tallahassee. I did a little research. By 1800 in Staffordshire, England, they have over 20,000 workers, which included children. They use children in these factories and glass factories as well. But it was a highly skilled industry. So it didn't catch on in the Americas until around the mid 1800s, because you needed these highly skilled workers and you needed very specific raw materials, the specific types of clays and the kilns to fire this stuff. So again, at this early time period, this stuff is just flooding the market. And they're trying to appeal to the American market in the designs that they're using. And this practice, we know, ceased in 1842 with the Copyright Act by Parliament. So it was illegal to reproduce these images that had been published in books. So that's another really good, archaeologists love time markers like that. So it's these marks and the patterns on this pottery I'm about to show you that really sealed the deal for the time period of this pottery and made them think that it was Planters Hotel. So they're Staffordshire time capsules. And these are just some examples of the different types that we have in the collection. And the dates are just really phenomenal for the time period we're talking about. So everybody is familiar with the blue willow pattern. But what's great about this one, it had a maker's mark on it. So I was able to get a really tight date on that one. And I was super excited that platter we've had in the collection, you know, on the shelf. If you come to collections, you'll see it. It actually has scratches all over it. It was used like crazy, really fascinating. And I was able to find that pattern on the Transport Collectors Club and got a really good date on that one too. Tuscan Rose was made by a couple of different manufacturers, Ridgway and Ralph James Clues. And again, those really tight dates. This is putting everything before that fire of 1843. And there are multiple pieces of this pattern from these features that are believed to be associated with the hotel, and also from some of the other features. I didn't go into too much about those, but there are other pieces of it. It's just really popular pattern at this point in time. And that's it for Planters Hotel. And I'm going to toss it back to Kimberlyn, and she's going to talk about livery stables. And you don't have to applaud every time.
Can we give Maria a hand? That was great.
No.
Only you asked not to. All right. So livery stables, I told you the horse valet was very interesting to me. But also there's something that's kind of intimately connected with our hotels as well, right? People are coming into town. Either they've prearranged for a ride to come and bring them in, or they're arriving with their own carriage or horse or whatever it may be, need a place to put up their animal. And so there come these livery stables. Some are kind of more of a retail business as well, like the one that we'll talk about, Brokaw and Miller's. They had a wholesale carriage business as well. But then others were more focused on kind of the husbandry of the animal, keeping them fed and healthy while you were doing whatever you need to do. So the City Hotel had livery stables around it and associated with it. And then we're going to talk more about some other ones in the area. So this is a cool one. It's showing J.C. Kemper's livery around 1890. And then you can see St. John's Episcopal in the back behind the trees. So yeah, we're on the east side of Monroe Street looking kind of north. Oh yeah, and you can see the streetcar, which is kind of cool. So there are a lot of intersections happening in this picture. And I think something kind of also interesting to me was trying to figure out when are the livery stables closing as the rise of the automobile happens, because the centennial celebration is something that I kind of looked at a lot over the past year, and you can very much see the influence of automobiles. The Tamiami Trail Association comes up from South Florida with this automobile caravan. They're in the brochures and programs, they're telling people where they can park. So like by 1824, the automobile is here in Tallahassee. And the Tampa Tribune writes this article about cars zipping all over the place, making the sleepy little city seem like a metropolis. But then just a couple of years earlier in like 1920, you can still see pictures of people on their horse in the middle of the street. So it wasn't like a stop and go abrupt break. So that transition from the horse to the automobile is quite interesting to me. I like to learn more about it. Yeah, especially coming into town. So we're going to look at this guy, Perez Bonnie Brokaw. He lived from 1813 to 1875. He arrived in Tallahassee in 1840 at the age of 26. And then he and his partner, Jacob Miller, in 1850 bought a quarter, oh my gosh, what's the term? Quarter, not lot, but I'll just say lot, but a quarter section, there we go, a quarter section of the past Lafayette land grant area. And so that is where the Brokaw McDougall house today is. And so he used part of that for his home, then also farmed part of it. And so when they bought the land, they also bought a lot of enslaved people to farm the land. And so they were farming things like sweet potatoes and other kind of vegetative goods for the area. Something also that Brown ends up doing, I should have mentioned this before, with his hotel, they have kind of like a little farm garden that feeds the hotel, and as well as raising livestock for, I'm sure, eggs and meat and whatnot. So at the same time, Miller and Brokaw are purchasing lots near the Capitol. So they start their livery stable in 1842, which is great until the fire comes a year later and burns it. And so then they purchased lots again in 1848 to have a brick livery, and it's up and running 2 years later. But then in 1853, their nice brick, supposedly fireproof livery also burns. And so they build it again. And it's a little confusing. Some sources say that it was in the same location, but looking at the newspaper articles, I think we have some in here, it seems to indicate that the livery has moved locations. So Brokaw is able to continue working with the livery after the Civil War, and kind of his business grows a little bit. But by the time he dies, he was in debt. And so his widow, his son purchased some of his shares of his company and some of his land at public auction, actually. But then his widow had to auction off a lot of the goods that they were selling, including the carriages and writing equipment. So here is an ad from 1844 advertising Brokaw and Miller's livery stables, a new livery stable in the rear of W.G. Burgess's store. And then again, we see some of the rates that they're offering. Let's see. Attached to the stable are 2 fine lots for drovers and bringing horses, mules, etc. to market. Horses are bought, sold in exchange, and matched by application. And so you could get hire a buggy by itself, hire a horse with a driver, 4 horses with drivers, all different combinations, trying to meet whatever the customer's needs would be. Something kind of interesting that they highlight is the patrons of the stable will not think hard that for horses, buggies, carriages, etc., the terms are cash. Having suffered heretofore from this ruinous credit system. So someone learned the hard way that you need to collect your money up front and not allow people to create these massive accounts, and then perhaps they don't pay them. And so here we have another another ad from 1848. And this is the one that indicates that there's been some sort of movement. So we're not quite sure where the first stable was. And then here, the subscribers have moved up to their fireproof brick stables before 1853 and take this opportunity to inform their friends and the public for their patronage. Come by our shop, our stables are here. We're situated on Washington Square in the most convenient part of town, which is true. And for the comfort and convenience, they cannot be surpassed by any stables in the southern county. Who are any of these stables? Let's look at them, because there were quite a few. Brokaw and Miller was not the only game in town. So we have contemporary stables that were operating around the same time, and then stables that continue into the 1890s, early 1900s, and even into the 1910s. So they include J.C. Kemper, which is down here, the M.M. Cobb up here. And this one is cool because it says he has workmen employed in erecting a row of new stalls on his lot next to the city hotel. So that helps us kind of situate. It makes sense, of course, to have your livery in the heart of town by the Capitol and by the hotels to ferry people back and forth and to greet them as they're coming in. The city stables, formerly known as Peter Robinson's, and then he also has his Prices, and then the Dexter livery stables. So Benjamin DeCourcy, Charles Avery, T.J. Roberts, M.M. Cobb, J.C. Kemper, Joseph Duncan, and Peter Robinson are all names associated with these different livery businesses. And we have pictures of some of them. So all of these come from the state archives. 2 photos again of Kemper's on the left, where you can see St. John's in the background again, and then the streetcar, and then JDK over here. We think JDK is actually driving the mules and advertising his business, and then Houston's is down here. So I don't know, these images are really fascinating to me, quite lovely. So here is the Elkin ledger, which is also pretty cool. Oh, okay, good. And so Elkin ran another livery stable in town. His prices range from 50 cents for one stall and one feed to $15 for a horse and a buggy. And looking through his ledgers, you see some familiar names like Matthew Lively, John Bradford, Charlie Chairs, and Richard Parkhill, letting you know like the clientele who's coming in and out of the stables. All right, now Marie's going to tell you a little bit more.
Okay, so this is back to the map that Chip made for us, so you can see where I'm talking about. This right here is the Leon County Courthouse. And this is the area that we're focusing on. That is lot 15. So let me go to the next slide. The courthouse sits on Washington Square. And all of these lots that are highlighted in yellow were purchased by Miller and Brokaw, then Miller passes away and Brokaw snatches up the rest of it. So we know he owns all of these lots. The problem is that we don't know where he built the stables. So we're relying on archaeology, hopefully, to let us know. So in 1985, they start construction of the Leon County Courthouse. And I said the demolition of the old courthouse, but I think that's actually inaccurate because I think they kind of, Lonnie, you might know, they kind of wrapped it around, didn't they, and kept parts of the old one, right? Because there's still that, the historic Florida map on there that they preserved. So I have to fix that. That's inaccurate. So this construction area encompassed 2 city blocks, so Washington Square and Block 15, and permission was granted to DHR by the Leon County Commission to conduct the salvage work because it wasn't state land, like the where the Planters Hotel, that was state-owned land. This is not. And obviously they did not get federal funds to build this because Section 106 didn't apply either. So they were basically being really gracious to Calvin Jones, who conducted these excavations, to allow him on there to do excavations. And he did this mostly in the evenings to try and stay out of the way of the backhoes. So it gets very confusing. I spent the afternoon about pulling my hair out, what's left of it as it gets older, as thin as I get older. But feature 4 is a round well, and feature 1 is the basement of a structure. And we're going to focus on those. And supposedly that's where all the equestrian stuff comes out of, but it gets confusing when you look at the artifacts. I think things got a little jumbled over time. Okay, so I wanted to point out as well that this area right here, this is Hutchinson's map again, here on the right. Right here, he draws a picture of the public well in Washington Square. So this is a public square, it's undeveloped, and there is this public well here, and that was also excavated around the same time that this was. This would have been like right in front of the courthouse, and Charlie Poe wrote up that section of it, and they found a lot of really cool stuff in there, but I'm not focusing on that because it didn't deal with equestrian or livery type artifacts. So okay, so here we can see in that one trench, which is feature 1 that we're going to talk about, that's Calvin down there at the bottom of the photo and David Swindell assisting him, and which revealed feature 1, a mule shed, they called it. And the other photo is that feature 4 that I showed you on the map, and that's Calvin down inside the well. Yeah, and I mentioned when they did this, so field decisions based upon available time and resources, as well as the totally unpredictable nature of construction activities, Calvin says. 7 features were discovered in all, 2 of which gave us equestrian artifacts that we're going to focus on. And that's just the area under construction. So did they actually find evidence of Brokaw's livery stables. Let's see, I've got a lot. He states that he uncovered an 18-foot wide building basement, which was later used as a refuse dump. And I've mentioned that Miller dies, and Brokaw adds a blacksmith shop. And in this excavation, there are 7 zones, and he doesn't collect anything until it starts turning into 19th century stuff, and he doesn't keep anything in levels. Everything is all one FS number, which Dave and Sally Panis can attest to. They've been helping me catalog that stuff, recatalog it, because it actually had been done properly and got all jumbled back together again. But what we want to focus on are level 6 and 7, because that's where the cool stuff comes out. Oh, and level 7, once they reach it, there's all this organic material, including corn cobs and pine straw and things like that. And in the report, he says it emitted a strong methane gas smell reminiscent of manure. I mean, can you imagine the time period that we're talking about? And it's so sealed in there, possibly because of one of those earlier fires, right? That it seals that ash layer in, just like it did with Planters Hotel, and you can still smell the horse manure. Pretty amazing. Ooh, sorry. So livery related objects up on the top, these are called hames. And right here, and I have a picture. This is actually from Washington Square, which is right next to where supposedly we think the livery stables were. That on the horse right there, I know it's kind of small, but the collar that goes around the horse, these sit on top of that. And you can actually side them left and right, and they hold the reins in place. And several of those were found. Bunches of horseshoes and mule shoes are found. This is actually part of a curry comb. And is it from feature 7, which is unrelated? Or is it from feature 4? Not really sure, but Dave and Sally are going to help me figure that out tomorrow. These are carriage parts. This is the step that you would step onto to get up into a wagon. Who would know that? But they figured that out back when they did these excavations. And I have a little drawing for you so you can see. Sorry, honey, I'm blocking your view. Trying to help people on Zoom. So you can get an idea of what it looked like when it was complete. And this is part of another one here. And this is believed to be the hub of a wagon wheel. So pretty compelling stuff, right? For livery related. Now, we know that Kimberlyn said there were multiple liveries in Tallahassee, but the land wasn't owned by Brokaw. So these are some other artifacts showing that fire again, a large blob of melted glass, badly burned ceramic bowl. And one other thing from feature 4, loads of stoneware chamber pots. I'm calling out Dave and Sally again. They got real intimate with these. We just opened a box and all these things were in there. We didn't know we had them because they were, now the chamber pots from Planters Hotel are on a shelf in collections, but these have been in a box for like decades and decades. We didn't know they were there. But apparently chamber pots were used in carriages for long journeys. You have to go, and they had a curtain, some carriages that you would pull across, and ladies would lift their skirts up and use these chamber pots and dump it out the carriage window as you're moving along. And there are probably close to 10 of these things. And these wound up in a well. I mentioned feature 4 is a well. Most of the horseshoes came out of the well. The chamber pots came out of the well. That is right next to that basement where all the methane smell came out of. Okay, so did we find Brokaw's livery stables or just a bunch of horse manure? So there are no historical records indicating that there were any structures on these lots that's my next slide. The lots that he had purchased on block 15 or Washington Square for that matter. We know that there were buildings on the western side of it, but there were none on any maps that we have that show any structures there. So it's kind of a guess that, gosh, when they're digging up that feature one, the basement, he comes across all of this brick. He didn't save any of it. He just noted there was all this brick. So it seems to be from a collapsed building. So at some point there had to have been a building there. The lot changes hands many times before Miller and Brokaw purchased them. And again, I say that most of those horse things came out of feature 4, the well. And Kimberlyn mentioned that when Brokaw dies in 1875, he has a lot of debts. As we know, a lot of them did. R.A. Shine had a lot of debts as well. They sell off all the stuff at auction, the contents of the livery. And is it possible that maybe some of the stuff that was broken or that didn't sell, they just threw it in the well? And Calvin's got a pretty good map here that shows the stratigraphy. Even though he kind of threw everything together and didn't separate, at least he drew a map so that we know that that the horse buggy parks came from this part, and they're below the late 19th and early 20th century stuff. So pretty good indication that we're about in the right time period, especially since he dies in 1875. And Kimberlyn threw these in. These are really interesting. I probably should let her throw it back to you to talk about it. But this kind of gives you an idea of the different things that occupy lot 15 over time. So you can see all these different structures that come in after the livery stables are there, including a cigar factory. This is the area where we're talking about where we think the livery stables were, some kind of storage building, a shed. And then over here, we get a little bit later in time, and this part, after the cigar factory moves to Tampa, we have an automobile dealership there, and then that moves on and other things move in, but coffin storage, right? This is where Cully's gets its start. Cully's funeral home gets its start, is right here where we think the livery stables were. So to wrap things up, from hotels to horses, history lies beneath our feet. So what Kimberlyn and I wanted you to realize as we recognize Tallahassee's 200th anniversary is all the history that lies beneath our feet. And you don't even think about it when you're downtown in modern Tallahassee. You don't think about all the history before you. When we're at Goodwood, we think about it, right? Because it's still a historic structure and we can see that, but things have changed so much in downtown Tallahassee. So the next time you're walking downtown and you're walking by the courthouse, just take a minute and stop and think. Or if you're at the Capitol and you're near the House chambers, think about the stuff that we have that the state is curating for future generations that lets us know the people that were there before us a long, long time ago. And I think that's pretty cool. And I feel very privileged that I get to work with those artifacts and share that with the public. So is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Nope.
So hopefully we didn't keep you in your chairs too long. I know Jeff Mitchum isn't here, but he complains when they're too long. He gets uncomfortable. So that's it. Anybody have any questions? Yes, sir. Yeah. Wow. Right. Uh-huh.
Came and talked to my dad about it, Chris. In my grandmother's book, My Tallahassee, she talks about Rascal Square, which was on that location. Rascal Square was where the livery was, and people came to trade their horses, and mule traders were always hanging out there. They were the rascals when they got its name. My dad used to say, still was called Rascal Square because all the rascals running our commission down there behind the but They had
So you're saying that's Rascal Square, right
that's
there.
Rascal
Mhm.
a picture, and they she asked her mother rather asked her sister if she couldn't pay to plant some live oaks there for shade for the horses. She felt so sad for the horses. They cut them all down for firewood.
Right, right.
No
Makes
trees
sense.
and parks. The May oak was there. That was about it. My grandmother said there was no oak trees, no trees up and down Park Avenue. They planted all the ones on the campus. She and a bunch of other ladies.
Very cool. Well, very interesting. I'll have to check out her book.
It was called Rascal Square, where all the horse traders.
Interesting. So they didn't call it Washington Square. They called it Rascal Square. So these are the rascals right there. You need to tell Florida Memory that so they can. That's where that picture came from. Thank you for sharing. That's great. Yeah. Yes, Lonnie.
You didn't mention that the site was looted. Calvin's working on it.
Yes, that is true. They had somebody guarding the site, and despite that, somebody came in and looted the site, and they don't know exactly what they took, but he believes that, and let's see, which one was it that they were, it was another well that I don't cover in this. They took some master ink bottles, he thinks, but they also found some other ones as well. Yeah, ceramic bottles that would have held ink. Yeah, and he doesn't know what else, because there were some bottles that were discarded, thrown to the side. It's an excellent report, especially the part that talks about the history of that lot, written by Barbara Maddox. She did a phenomenal job researching the deeds and the history of that lot. So it's really well done. Any other questions?
I was waiting for somebody to ask, what are we doing to preserve archaeological sites in Tallahassee now?
Pretty much absolutely nothing, Lonnie. Except Lonnie trying desperately to get the commission, the city commission, to hire an archaeologist. But time and time again, history is being bulldozed away. And it's only because Calvin was there, and Calvin was Calvin and wanted to get in there because they knew that it was his. Right, right. And he's going in the evenings, so he wouldn't get in their way. Yeah.
They're really beneficiaries of the fact that the state was able to do a lot of work in Tallahassee.
Yes.
Back in the 80s.
Right. Things that we wouldn't ordinarily take into the collection now, because we can't, because we're so limited with space. But if we didn't have that, we wouldn't know any of this, you know. So it's.
We need a city county archaeologist.
Kimberlyn, could you come up a moment, please? Oh, yeah. So I would just like to thank you so much for your wonderful research. And as a token of our appreciation, we've got a t-shirt for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, you can. Are you allowed to? Because it doesn't have the Department of State logo. You have to be careful. You are going to graduate.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. And thank everybody for coming out. And if you're able, please check out Guy's presentation on January 14th at 11:30. And that will be right here, right? Or no, in the carriage house. In the carriage house. So yeah, so come in and fill up those chairs for me, because I'll be at work and I won't be able to go. So anyway, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful holiday season. Thank you for your support. Take care.